it's undue influence. A billion-dollar railroad and the corporation are able to use a web of ex-government officials and the lobbying and the PR, and they're able to control the narrative. That is a big deal, and I see it happening in East Palestine. There's EPA people that call me up almost like whistleblowers. Scott, keep doing what you're doing. You give us hope. We want East Palestine to be a turning point. They tell me things. The EPA people, if you got rid of the undue influence coming out of the Washington, and you just let the people on the ground and the scientists from the EPA speak, not only would the community trust them, but you'd get to the bottom of it, and they'd truly be the Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, maybe they should be the CPA or the Corporate Protection Agency at this point.
There has been certain stories that have been kind of memory hold. As Maui fires happen and other things happen, we kind of, as a nation, forgot about East Palestine and the destruction that happened there and the suffering that's still happening because of that train derailment and dioxins that are causing sicknesses. And now we see, Maui fires but it's just like Biden started out with no comment, and it just seems like something else that could fizzle out if we don't keep attention on it. So News Nation was the only outlet I've seen recently report on East Palestine. Here is the report. East Palestine crisis mirrors what turned a Missouri city into a ghost town. High dioxin levels turned the Missouri community into a ghost town in the 70s. East Palestine residents say they've been pleading for more testing, and many residents remain skeptical of the EPA and their handling of the crisis. So we turned to Scott Smith when this was still in the news cycle. We're turning to him again. He's an expert in dioxins and other toxins who's been doing tests there in Palestine for a while now. We're going to turn to him for an update. He has focused on solving water contamination problems ever since his small business was wiped out in an oil-contaminated flood waters there in New York. Now he's an independent testing expert, CEO of BioSolutions, frequently working on the ground in contamination events, supporting communities by investigating and finding the truth and bringing those people together. He's been at it there in East Palestine, so we're so looking forward to his unique perspective on what's happening now. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Hey, good afternoon, Christy. Great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are. I truly mean that. We're so appreciative of you and your dedication and your time and your relentless pursuit of the truth, and not letting these big companies and agencies get away with forgetting about these citizens. I mean, these residents must be so appreciative that you're continuing to try and investigate what's happening and shine the light on this. So what are you seeing there in East Palestine now?
Well, first of all, I just got back yesterday from my 14th round of testing, and this is a great community. None of these people are making things up. They are really sick. Some are getting much sicker, and they just want their lives back. They don't want any handouts. They want to know that their children, their grandchildren, and their families aren't going to get cancer in 3 to 5 years, and they just want their health. But what we are now seeing is dioxin levels. And dioxins, there's a whole host of chemicals beyond dioxins, but why we're focused on dioxins is they don't go away. They bioaccumulate, they build up in your body. We call it a dioxin burden. Every human is different. And what we're finding is continued high levels of dioxins versus background samples from other places in the country that haven't experienced a derailment or a disaster. So the way I summarize this simply is that the evidence is clear that the dioxin burden in the community, in the soil, in the creeks, and so on, has definitely increased after the Norfolk Southern derailment and intentional burn.
Now, News Nation, now here's a comparison that you have there. News Nation was comparing this to Missouri. So what is different from 40 years ago, Palestine to Times Beach?
Well, actually, in Times Beach, that slide was called the toxic equivalency index, which didn't exist 40 years ago. It's how we can get to that. But 40 years ago, it was a measure of total dioxins. In Times Beach, if you were between 1 to 5 parts per billion, you were evacuated, the government purchased your home. And one of the residents I tested, Shelby Walker, she was 2.5 parts per billion in a recent soil test. And the thing is, the EPA has refused to test her soil on many other people. And that's
Mm.
what's inexplicable. Now, you asked a very good question. What was different? Well, 40 years ago, the EPA, to the best of my knowledge, did not have this extensive public affairs office with public information officers. And I want to be very clear. I've been doing this for 17 years, over 60 disasters. The EPA people on the ground, scientists doing the work, they're great, honest people, but they are not allowed to speak. Something comes out of DC with the narrative. But 40 years ago, the president declared a task force. And guess what? In Times Beach, the EPA administrator herself, the CDC high level person, all went in and worked together and declared the disaster. And 40 years later, it's undue influence. A $1 billion railroad and the corporation are able to use a web of ex-government officials and the lobbying and the PR, and they're able to control the narrative. That is a big deal, and I see it happening in East Palestine.
I mean, basically, in short, corruption. I mean, it's just like pure corruption in 40 years to where these agencies, like, what are they good for? I mean, is the reason they're refusing to test in East Palestine when the residents ask, do you feel that the reason is because they already know the answer and they're going to have to be held to account to what to
That,
do about it? Or
that is very likely, but I can tell you, I have an expression: you can't find what you don't look for. So if the EPA is not willing to test those people that are reporting symptoms, if they don't look for it, they can't find it. Therefore, they can go with the narrative, nothing to see here. And Christy, just think about if you and I had a business or a venture on a property and we had an accident and burned vinyl chloride. Just imagine this. We burn vinyl chloride. All our neighbors around us are getting sick. Do you think the EPA would show up and say nothing to see here? It's mass psychosis, and it's that there's no need to test because it's all in the background. I don't think so. If this happened, if you weren't a $1 billion company, you'd be looking at jail time.
absolutely. So, do you think that the EPA just has been completely captured by undue influence of those corporations? I mean, is that what you're gathering
Yeah,
based on you've been there the
yeah.
longest?
I want to be very clear in that it is the highest levels and it's very sophisticated in how they're captured. But I want to say 17,000 employees, I'd be ventured 95, 98%. I want to be very clear. There's EPA people that call me up almost like whistleblowers. Scott, keep doing what you're doing. You give us hope. We want East Palestine to be a turning point. They tell me things. The EPA people, if you got rid of the undue influence coming out of the Washington, and you just let the people on the ground and the scientists from the EPA speak, not only would the community trust them, but you'd get to the bottom of it, and they'd truly be the Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, maybe they should be the CPA or the Corporate Protection Agency at this point. And pardon the pun, but it appears, the way the EPA is behaving, it appears as though they're helping the railroad cover their tracks of contamination. It is that simple.
What's hard to figure out too is where are more of the environmentalists? I mean, you see these silly videos of people like blockading streets and protesting climate change. Where are they in East Palestine, right? I mean, or do
Uh,
you feel like there's any environmentalists like raising a stink there where it actually needs to be done? People are actively suffering. They're sick right now and they have no advocacy other than an independent researcher like yourself.
Well, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. And here's what I say. I have an expression called sustainability without compromise. Now, if you don't have sustainable health for a community like East Palestine, you have nothing. But yet you'll see all these demonstrations. Yeah, banning single-use plastic straws, that's all well and good. But where are those same people caring about their fellow human beings, American citizens? And they're nowhere to be found. And to me, that's just it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
It's really sick and very disappointing because, I mean, ultimately, what does this latest dioxin testing that you're doing mean? What does it mean for these families, these generations, this land?
Well, what it mean we can clearly point to now, it's called the dioxin burden, and the EPA likes to spin it. So the dioxin burden has clearly increased post derailment, and everyone has a different burden. Everyone's bed has different exposure, but again, like unlike the other chemicals, dioxins build up in your body; they don't go away. And clearly, the burden in the soil and in the community has increased post derailment. And what we do is we identify what people have potentially been exposed to so they can seek out, under their prerogative and their right, doctors, toxicologists. And what spreads the fear and panic is refusal to test their soil. Think about the EPA again, 17,000 employees, $12 billion. They could test all the soil of everybody in East Palestine that wanted it for probably $250,000 or less. Why are they refusing? Why are they refusing to test soil?
Absolutely. And I mean, I know obviously you're not in Maui or anything, but like this is now kind of taken over the headlines, what's happened there. And again, of course, they're blaming that on climate change. Do you see this as a pattern where I was concerned with some of the comments from the Biden administration and, the continued attention on Ukraine. I was kind of seeing Maui just going the way of East Palestine. They're going to try and just like memory hole it and cover up all the human failures that happened there. Did you have any opinion on that, or are you far removed from that
It
to
was
where you
say
don't
the
have an
thing
opinion?
about just to put in a East Palestine residents in the community reached out. I was supposed to go there twice, and now I'm going to be there until I finish the job. Unfortunately, whether it's Maui or other disasters, I am morally obligated to see East Palestine out and fight with that community until they get what they need. But when it comes to Maui, I'm not exactly up to speed on it. But um, blaming things on climate change and all these other things, that's all well and good, but you got to focus on the community, understanding what people need, and you can't find what you don't look for. You need to do the proper testing, and then you need to get to the truth as to what happened. And I haven't been following closely enough. Something about utilities fires. I don't know if you know, but something went on there, and like East Palestine, you just need to get some independent people in there and get to the truth.
Absolutely. And let me tell you, I guess what I want to get after is what is the end game for you? Because it seems like it would be so discouraging to do this testing and you have the evidence right in front of your face and you're not getting any support. You're getting an agency that is covering up. It doesn't seem like the governor there is doing anything to help these residents. What what is the end game? What gives you hope that you can help them? Because you said I'm going to stay here until I finish the job. So what would you consider a
Well,
finished job, and how do we get
let,
there?
let me, that's great. So I know all the public information officers track me, and I'm say hi to them. They are probably be watching this, and all my social media posts. And why I'm optimistic is, in over the 60 disasters, there are resources coming behind me, and that I can't get into the details because I don't want to give it away right now. But that I'm optimistic that in 5 to 10 years, East Palestine is much more than about uh, the direct communities, because of the heroic residents that are standing up for themselves, and I'm working and doing everything to support. I think East Palestine is going to be looked at as a turning point, finally exposing the undue influence and helping clean up the contamination in our government. And there, I am blown away after 17 years in 60 disasters, the organizations, the resources, the scientists, some of them you will recognize when it comes out. They want to do the right thing. They have had enough of the corruption in this country. So that's why I'm optimistic. No matter how many attacks, no how many spins, and I think we've spoken before about the 5 Ds of PR that all the public information officers from government agencies and the railroad likes to use. The delay, deny, uh, discredit, dismiss, and the fifth one is now they're in the defamation. But it's just simply not going to work. And exposing it for what it is, about trying to control the narrative and the public relations. That is the best way to counter it, and just keep bringing it back to the science, to the truth. The certified independent lab results do not lie. You can't find what you don't look for. EPA, if you're not going to test people's soil, if you're not going to test the creek where people are exposed, obviously you can't find anything.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for people to share this counter narrative, to share this message from you, Scott, so that we can keep the pressure on and continue to shine a light on, like you said, this could be a turning point to show, like, see, this is everywhere. This corruption is everywhere. There's too
Yeah.
much undue influence on things like this. And we've lost our sense of humanity. That being said, I mean, my goodness, again, Scott, like, just so amazed by you, like that you take all that time and resources and you just have just dove in and you want to fight for this community. Do you ever get scared that you're going to get irreversibly harmed by being around chemicals like this and doing your testing?
Well,
Tell me that.
yeah, sometimes I've got a good doctor. I get checkups, but I get in and out quickly, usually exposure. But I will say in East Palestine, I don't even need to do the testing. I'm like a human indicator, but it takes 3 to 4 days and after exposure coming back. So, and I've never seen a disaster where like an oil disaster, it does dissipate, it gets cleaned up over time. But it's almost as if when they're remediating and they're digging things more up, they're constantly re-releasing things. And a lot of interesting things go on at night there when they're digging, and then the smells come out and the people get sick. But this is much bigger than me. I'm just here to support the community, and I am sick and tired of the corruption and the undue influence in this country, whether it's, large corporations, and I won't even get started in this segment on the banking industry and what they get away with and they do to the whole country. But it has to stop. And it's going to take
Yeah.
people coming together. It's going to take media like yourself, talk about the so-called mainstream media is controlled by these corporations too. And thank God for what you do, Christy, and the counter narrative and everybody else out there, because I can tell you firsthand that whether it's the situation, whether it's the government agencies or the railroad, they live in absolute fear of the truth from journalists like yourself. So thank you, and keep it
Mm.
up. And you give me great hope to be able to be here. I can't thank you enough for the community of East Palestine, really, because you allow the truth to get out. And without you, the truth may not get out.
Wow, well, that's a huge compliment coming from you, Scott, because you're the true hero in this, and we really appreciate you being out there, boots on the ground, and really helping this community and showing humanity what humanity is supposed to be like. So, thank you so much. Please keep us updated. We want to continue to shine a light on this and expose this corruption and undue influence. Thank you, Scott.
I will. Thanks for having me, Christy. Thank you.